the main mission objectives of Apollo 16 was to explore the lunar highlands. All the previous missions had landed in the Mare, which is the dark areas of the moon. We were in the center of the moon, and the bright area was our target, and it was called the Descartes Highlands. And we were the first and only scientific exploration of the lunar highlands. So in relative altitude, if you considered Apollo 11 at sea level, we were 8,000 feet above. As we trained in landing, you could recognize all of these craters that were 45 feet and bigger. Well, when we got in the actual landing at 7,000 feet, the lunar module pitches over and you can see the landing site for the first time. We looked out there, man, look at all those craters. And there were a lot of craters up there less than 45 feet.
And here it is, Gators, Lone Star. Call me the thing, Charlie.
John started maneuvering to find a spot. So we landed, and we were almost dead level. John picked a good spot.
Wow! Oh, man! We're around and finally here, Houston. Fantastic!
We had a rest period, and the next day we got outside, and my job was to help him get the rover off first. And then after that is to go around and get the lunar experiments package off the back of the lunar module. And it had a power source which was radioactive. And you had to be real careful with that. And so I'd practice and practice. So fortunately it went very well, but I looked at, man, look at this crater, John. And we had missed a deep crater by 2 meters, 6 feet. And if we'd landed 6 feet back, one of the legs would have been in that crater, and we wouldn't have turned over, but the experiments package would have been out of reach because I'd have to go down into that crater to get to it, and I wouldn't have been able to reach it. So we were very, very fortunate, and we hadn't seen that crater. It didn't have a rim, I guess, so it just sort of slowly went down like that. John was the driver of the car, and I was the navigator. So we had a set of maps. The objectives were on the maps. EVA number 1 was to go straight out about 1.5 miles to Plum Crater, Flag Crater, and sample those craters. And we got on our rover and we drove out there. We were picking up rocks that we were excited about, but the geologists thought that we were big dummies because they were expecting volcanic rocks, and we weren't seeing any volcanic rocks. There were a lot of breccias and stuff like that. It took us a while to convince these guys that, hey, there's no volcanic rocks up here that we could find. But we continued to collecting. We were so excited just to be there, and the beauty of the moon, the thrill of adventure, the wonder, the awe of the place. We felt right at home, primarily because we'd studied these photographs that had been taken on Apollo 14 of our landing area, and that's the way they designed the traverses, was based on those photographs. We never got tired of looking for volcanic rocks, but we never did find hardly any, mostly breccias and other things like that. But then they got excited, the geologists, when they felt like we were really describing something that was unique. They became really excited because they hadn't seen anything like this in the other missions that had brought back material from the moon. We were on the far side of the crater. We'd parked the rover on the east side, and we were around on the west side, and Mission Control controlled the camera. They said as we were coming back,
as you come around there, there's a rock in the near field on this rim that has some white on the top of it. We'd like you to pick it up as a grab sample.
John and I started arguing with him. I said, Houston, this is a big rock. It's like a watermelon. And you really want us to pick it up? And yeah, go ahead, pick it up, please. That's one we want. So it was on the slope of this Plum Crater on the inside. I mean, I couldn't reach over and pick it up from the upside. So I had to get around and go down into the crater a little bit and lean over, and it was so big I couldn't pick it up.
That's a big class in it, John. It sure has.
I rolled it up my leg and rolled it up and was carrying it like a little baby. The head of our science team was a guy named Mulberger. He was head of the geology department at the University of Texas. So we named the rock the Big Muley after him.
I fall in the plum crater getting this rock. Wahlberger has had it.
Oh, yeah, great.
I got it. That's 20 pounds of rock.
The Rover was an amazing vehicle. The Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville managed that program. It was a tremendous design and very, very efficient, revolutionized lunar exploration.
Is he on the ground at all?
That's 10 kilometers. He's got about 2 wheels on the ground. If they turn sharp.
I have no desire to turn sharp. Okay, here's a Sharpie.
Hey, that's great. He's a big rooster tail out of all 4 wheels. And as he turns, he skids, the back end breaks loose just like on snow. Come on back, John. Man, I'll tell you, Andy's never seen a driver like this. Okay, when he hits the craters and starts bouncing is when he gets his rooster tail. He makes sharp turns.
The Rover was actually 5 feet wide and 10 feet long, but the place they had to put it on the lunar module was only 5 by 5. The chassis was 3 parts, a front chassis, a center chassis, and a rear chassis, and they were hinged. And so they folded it over, so now 10 foot long became 5 foot long, and they just bolted it up to the side of the spacecraft that we deployed when we got on the surface. I think the farthest we got away was about 4 miles. The distance you could go out was limited with how far could you walk back if it broke. And we had trained in a centrifuge at NASA. They took the centrifuge part out, and it was a big circle, and so we put on our spacesuits and backpacks and everything. They put us in this harness and just lifted us up until we weighed lunar weight down here. With all of my gear on down here, I weighed 363 pounds, but up there 60. So I'm running around this centrifuge at basically 60 pounds. We felt like we could run 4 miles. And so that was the limit of our traverses. So everybody got really excited about using the Rover, and it really revolutionized the distance you could cover and what you could bring back. You could just load up the Rover with rocks. It was fun to ride. We had a seat belt. It was bouncy on the moon. The steering was like on ice, real sensitive. I remember John was driving. He was in the left, and he was driving with his right hand, and I'm sitting on the right, and I'm taking pictures every 50 meters because we don't have TV. And I'd turn to take a picture, and man, we'd go off this way or that way because I'd hit his elbow, and he kept getting angry at me. "Stop hitting me, Charlie." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm just turning to get a picture." Anyway, we finally figured out how to do that right. The second EVA was to Stone Mountain. And that was a spectacular view up there.
Wow, what a place. What a view, isn't it, John?
It's absolutely unreal.
We really come up here, Tony. It's just spectacular. I have never seen it. All I can say is spectacular, and I know y'all are sick of that word, but my vocabulary is so limited.
So John said, "Well, let's see how fast we can go." And we started down Stone Mountain, and it was really steep, and the speedometer really hit the peg, and we were going at least 17 kilometers per hour, and we were bouncing like crazy. But it was yahoo. It was really fun. After an EVA, we would first off get off our suits, clean them up. The dust on the moon was like static, and it would get on your suit, and you couldn't brush it off. And so our white suits turned out gray at the end. So we'd brush it off and clean up the valves and all, and recharge the backpack and things like that. And that took a couple of hours. Then we'd debrief. We'd take off our suits, lay out our hammocks, and we'd take a rest period. And that was our routine. 3 days, 3 24-hour periods, included breakfast, 1 meal when we got back inside, and charge the suits and everything like that, and then we would go sleep for 8 hours. After that, you were really exhausted. Working out in a spacesuit 8 hours on the moon, even though it doesn't weigh as much, it's still stiff. And you get cramps in your hands and in your forearms, but you just overlook all of that stuff. One of the things we found not difficult but frustrating was the ability to judge distance. Down here on Earth, you see an airplane or you see a fence, you see a tree and a house and people, and so you get very good at judging distances. But up on the moon, you're just looking at rocks you've never seen before. We were up on North Ray Crater, and there was this rock around on the other rim, and I said, John, let's go sample that rock. And he said, oh, it's too far away. Oh, come on, John, it's just right over there. So I talked him into it, so we started jogging. And we jogged, and the rock kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Look at the size of that biggie. It is a biggie, isn't it? It may be further away than we think. No, it's not very far. It was just right beyond you.
Finally, we got over there, and this rock was like house rock. It was bigger than a house.
Look at the size of that rock. Well, Tony, that's your house rock right there.
We must have come a quarter mile or so to get around to that thing. So we're standing there looking up at this big rock, and we were on the sunny side, and I got this little hammer in my hand. I said, well, let's see what we can get. And I whacked it a couple of times, and we got a couple of pieces about the size of cantaloupes and brought that back, and we named it House Rock, and it's very predominant rock. You can see it in all the photographs even. On the way back, we wanted a permanently shadowed soil sample. Well, we found this rock that was about 10 feet tall, and on the west side, it looked like a tunnel under the rock. And I said, that's a good example of permanently shadowed. So I reached under there, leaned on the rock and reached under as far as I could to get a shovel full of this soil. And I remember saying, if you do that in West Texas,
and you get a rattlesnake.
But if you do it on the moon, you get a permanently shadowed soil sample. John had a great sense of humor. We trained for 2.5 years together, back up on 13. Now 2 years of training for 16. So we learned everybody's idiosyncrasies, and we never let that bother us. We just, melded together, and with his sense of humor, he just kept me in stitches a lot. At the end of our stay, John and I decided we were going to do the Moon Olympics, and we were going to do the high jump and the broad jump. We were running behind, but John started bouncing up and down. I said, Houston, we're behind, but we were going to do the Moon Olympics.
We were going to do a bunch of exercise that we had made up as the Lunar Olympics. Show you what a guy could do on the moon with a backpack on.
He starts bouncing, and I start bouncing. Well, when I jumped for the record, I straightened up, and my center of gravity went backwards, and there I went over on my back.
Wow.
The only moment of fear I had in the whole mission. And fear's not a bad emotion if you don't panic. So the thought occurred, roll right. So I rolled to the right as I was going down and broke my fall on my right side. So the backpack didn't take the full impact. And I say backpack, that's your life support system. And if it breaks, you're dead. So I'm flat on my back now, and I'm still breathing, and my heart's pounding. And John comes over and looks down and says,
Charlie, that ain't any fun, is it? That ain't very smart.
And I said, yeah, I know, help me up. So I began to calm down, and the TV camera was pointed right at me, and then I got embarrassed because they'd seen all this stuff. And the mission control, that's it, guys, get back inside, no more Moon Olympics. So we got back inside, got ready for liftoff. I left a picture of my family on the moon, which was very special. And I left a commemorative coin of the Air Force. It was the 25th anniversary of the Air Force in 1972. So they designed a special coin that I left on the moon. Two of them, one I brought back and gave back to them, and the other's still on the moon. So those are the little things that really mean a lot to me now. My boys were 5 and 7 at the time. They were proud of their dad, but the whole neighborhood was going to the moon, so it was hard to get them excited that my daddy's going to the moon, because I was probably the last one in the neighborhood to go. Neil Armstrong lived behind us about a block, and Bill Anders next door, and Frank Borman lived in the neighborhood. John Stafford lived in the neighborhood. John Young lived in the neighborhood. Stu Russo lived in the neighborhood. Ron Evans, so a lot of us went to the moon. Then John and I went to work on Apollo 17 as a backup crew. They needed a backup crew, and it was a dead-end job, But I talked John into it. I said, John, suppose they break a leg. Somebody's got to go. Maybe we'll get a chance to go again. So we volunteered, but we supported them. We didn't get to go again. But Artemis is on the way. They're going to have a big challenge down at the South Pole. It's a lot rougher than where we landed on the Maury. Well, I'm 87 years old, and I'm still the youngest man who walked on the moon. I'm physically qualified, but NASA's not going to let me go back to the moon. But I would. It's wonder, awe, exciting adventure, the changing shades of gray and the undulations and the lunar highlands was spectacular.